At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 45% off with minimum purchase plus a professional measure at no cost. Rules and restrictions apply.
Unfiltered discussions. Unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hello, welcome to The Last Show, and as ever, here's what you're going to learn on tonight's program. Here's something. Why are people obsessed with chasing ghosts? It's Halloween coming up after all, century after century, camera after camera. What does that say about us, more so than the poltergeist we're trying to catch? Think Ghost Hunter TV shows. In 10 minutes' time, we'll answer the question what endless ghost hunting reveals about us living, not the dead. After, we'll discuss a new finding showing successful women who earn more than their partners are still doing more of the mental load of chores at the home. You know, the planning, the remembering, the worrying that keeps a family running. That'll be halfway through the hour, and if you're a dude who says to your wife, just tell me what chores to do and I'll do them, you're not carrying said load. Okay, those are just some of the many topics we'll hit on tonight's show. That's just some of what you'll learn. There will be more, we'll cover more, but for now, we'd better dive in. And in dystopian toilet paper news, we go to special toilet paper correspondent Tony Five, who's live at the scene in Norfolk, England. He's holed up in a motorhome. Not the scene of the story we're about to talk about, but a scene nonetheless. We go to China, where toilet paper isn't so easy to come across these days, it would seem. Tony, welcome to the show.
David, it is I, yes, reporting live from China via Norfolk in England. It is a very dystopian China, David. A future where, when you go to the toilet, David, you need to watch an advert on your phone to get 6 squares of toilet paper to wash your backside with.
Can you spare a square? That's a Seinfeld reference you can't catch. So in public toilets in China, they were finding that people were stealing or using too much toilet paper. Rather than just stock more, they thought, okay, we're going to make a little money off of this toilet paper and play an ad for people,
Yep.
Make them watch it. They have to scan a QR code with their phone
Correct.
while they're on the john. Side note, what happens if your phone is dead?
What happens if you don't have a phone? I mean, it's a little bit of a spurious article. It came from an Instagram post, so we can argue that, you know, how legit is our sources. But like all of the sources that we get, David, we don't really base any of the factual information we get on that. So
You might say this source has gone to the blanker, if you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely. So basically, you go into the toilet, you actually have to have your phone, you scan, like you said, a QR code, and initially a couple of squares of toilet paper come out, like a little reel. It's like those machines, you know, when you go and play, is it skee ball? These little things. Is it skee ball? You know, when you throw that ball up and in a fun fair or something, and
Yeah. And you got to get it in the hole to get like 50 points or something.
and you get your little tickets come out, right? So you get your little tickets, you get your little toilet paper come out, you go. But then, David, you have to predict the effluence rate, my friend. So now you are at a quandary. Do you pay 7 cents via coin to get your toilet paper, or do you scan and watch an ad in order to get free toilet paper? What do you do, David?
Oh, man. How long is the ad? I think if it's like a 5-minute ad, 7 cents. But if it's 30 seconds, you know what? 7 cents? I think I would pay 7 cents to avoid a 30-second ad.
The whole idea of this is to, you know, save the planet. People waste a lot of toilet paper. They do the double wipe, the triple wipe, the quad wipe, the front and rear wipe, the horizontal wipe. I get it, David. I get it. I know you're an aficionado of the toilet. You spend a lot of your best hours there. You've got a fancy toilet, in fact.
For regulatory purposes, this is getting too inappropriate, so I'm just saying we're reporting on a legitimate news story that was reported on Instagram and can't be verified. So this is all factual and news, so Tony's not being inappropriate. Yes, you have to judge how much toilet paper you're going to use. But back to the 7 cents thing, I think 10 cents would be my boundary. I would watch a 30-second ad for 10 cents, but 7, that's like nothing. I would actually probably pay it for the TP.
Wow, 7 cents, nothing, but 10 cents is your boundary. That's a 35% increase over the 4% that you want to pay, right?
Something like that.
That's incredible. So that's your limit, 10 cents. Wow. But for example now, David, do you use a bidet?
I have one at home. I don't really use it. I don't really like it, but my girlfriend swears by it.
I was going to say, because if you liked it, would you pay per pump? Would you pay per flush? Like a quart of liquid for 5 cents? Where is your limit on that, my friend?
I'm unsure on that, but she probably would. Would you watch the ad or would you pay 7p? I know, pence instead of cents. Is that what you call them?
Yeah, I'd pay the 7 pence. I need a toilet. And I generally don't watch ads anyway. I find them annoying and irritating. And it wouldn't be anything related to me. Can you imagine what the ads are going to be?
Except for the ads that play on this show by our sponsors, which we love and we encourage listening to. And we're a big fan of all the products.
Yeah, and they would be worth many, many sheets of toilet paper, David. All the ads and all the promos that promote the show, David, will be worth more than 10 cents. I would say 25 cents, a quarter, as you were.
We go to your favorite place in the United States that you've never been to for our next story, New Jersey, or as you call it, New Jersey.
Hey, I'm walking here, and exactly, I'm talking about a pizza place in New Jersey, David.
It's exactly right. So we go to New Jersey where a cop was called to respond to a shooting. You know, I imagine that's a pretty urgent radio call from the dispatcher. If you're a cop and there's a shooter, it's like all units respond, take caution, code red, DEFCON 1, whatever it is they say. And you would think every on-duty officer in the vicinity would go immediately to the scene of a shooting to assist because, well, there's a murder in progress. But instead, one New Jersey cop did something a little different. Can we fault him for it? First of all, what did he do?
David, very sadly, it was a double homicide. And this particular policeman chose a double pepperoni pizza instead of a double homicide, my friend. So what he did, he was dispatched, he was called. But this silly little officer who has got GPS in his patrol car was found to have gone to an ATM where he obviously withdrew money and then sat in a pizza parlor having a pizza.
A slice or assisting in a double homicide? That is the great quandary of this New Jersey police officer. Did he make the right choice? I think it all depends on what kind of slice he got.
Well, I'm thinking that he kind of could have got away with it saying that he'd stopped whether he went 3 kilometers in the other direction, David.
I wouldn't have stopped for a pepperoni. I would have gotten a plain cheese. I don't know. Are police officers like obligated to assist, or are we just hope they will? Like, I think that's the real question. Like, I know what he did is
pretty sure it's part of the vow they do, right?
I don't know. Like, ethically, I think we can all agree that the cop messed up. But like, legally? Is he like legally responsible? Is it a dereliction of duty? I wish I knew.
I guess so. I guess he could be fired for, dereliction of duty because his job is to respond to these emergencies, right? So he ended up going for 1 hour in Duke's Pizzeria, which, again, I'd like to visit just to find out if it is worth more than a double homicide. He stopped there, and then he went to another restaurant and stayed there for another hour. So this guy was hungry.
We can't say that he didn't eat well. To the ethical question and legal question, he is being charged with official misconduct for knowingly refraining from performing police duties. So I guess he is in legit trouble.
And
He's
he
not
has
just
got
gonna
another
get fired.
charge. He tampered with public records and, he knowingly made false entries. So that's fine.
Oh, he tried to cover it up. He tried to say it was a veggie slice, not pepperoni, I guess.
Correct. He was like, no, I got the garlic bread, guys. You can't do me for pizza. I just got the garlic bread with cheese. It was sad because obviously it was a murder-suicide by another police officer, a state police officer.
Wow.
So again, there might be something that we don't know about. Maybe he knew him or something like that. But I did find it very strange that he ended up going the other way. Surely they must know. They have GPS in their cars. Or he turns up to the homicide and he's got pizza sauce down his front.
Anyway, the family of the victims are saying they're upset and the conduct was egregious, which at the end of the day, I agree. Depending on the quality of Duke's Pizza, I feel like that's an awful joke. All jokes aside, not condoning any of this, and shame on that cop.
I mean, do you think we should contact Duke's Pizza and find out how good their pizza is?
Is your pizza good enough to do a dereliction of duty? That'll be a game show that we host.
I'm an airline pilot. I could fly David to New York, or I could come and get your pizza. What should I do, Duke's Pizza?
All right. The official view of the show is this is awful. Our sympathies go to the family, and the police officer shouldn't have done that, and it's not funny. That's our official view.
But also, we want to know how good the pizza is.
But also, unofficially, that. Tony Five, foreign correspondent in London, England. Tony, what a pleasure it was having you on the show.
David, always a pleasure, my friend. Always a pleasure. Good night.
Never a pleasure, never a joy is not what Tony ever says. Never, probably. Coming up, are ghosts real, or are we just looking for ourselves in the dark when we watch ghost hunter shows? It's Halloween, so after the break, we'll dig into why ghost hunting never seems to die.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
In the 70s, 4 young women were found dead. For nearly 50 years, their cases went cold. I'm Nancy Hixt, a senior crime reporter for Global News. In the season finale of Crime Beat, I share how investigators uncovered shocking evidence of a serial killer and hear exclusive interviews with the killer's family. Listen to the full season of Crime Beat early and ad-free on Amazon Music by asking Alexa to play the podcast Crime Beat.
The last show with David Cooper, where we utilize non-linear reverse, inverse, backward thinking protocols. It sounds like this.
From seances held hundreds of years ago to YouTube live streams of people hunting in haunted hospitals, some people can't get enough of ghost hunting. Our fascination with ghosts never seems to die. I guess that's like the ghosts who aren't dying either. But searching for spirits, it might reveal things about us more than the dead beings we're looking for. I'm here with Alice Vernon, a creative writing lecturer, to discuss just that. She's from Aberystwyth University in the UK. Alice, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, David.
You've recently written about our fascination with ghost hunting, and this article you wrote covers this Sir William Crookes and a fake ghost. And who is this guy? He was a scientist, and yet he was captivated by this spiritual realm?
Yeah, so in the sort of late Victorian era, you get a lot of very eminent scientists being fascinated by ghost hunting and seances and spiritualism, which had really grown in popularity from the sort of mid-Victorian era onwards. And there was a very famous British medium called Florence Cook, and she was very pretty and dainty. And she'd had a bit of trouble. People were exposing her for fraud. So her parents, who were financially benefiting from Florence's mediumship, thought that if they got Sir William Crookes in, a very famous chemist, to come and sit and do some seances with Florence, he would be able to endorse her. Because he'd done some work in spiritualism and sort of, investigation before, so he was a big name. So he came and he started to do these seances with Florence, and she had a particular technique in her seances where she'd disappear into a cabinet and shut the door, and then all sorts of spooky noises would happen, and then she'd open the door again, and a spirit called Katie King would emerge. And it was basically Florence Cook in a bed sheet. And everybody was mesmerized and thought, oh, this ghost is among us, including Sir William Crookes, who in his report, you can see gradually he starts to get quite affectionate with Katie King especially. I think he had the hots for Florence Cook, but for some reason, her in a bedsheet just, redid it for him. And so you can see him kind of start to fall in love with this alleged ghost, Katie King. And it really starts to compromise his skepticism, and he starts to really believe in this very fraudulent mediumship. And it nearly cost him his career as well.
Why do people, I guess a modern equivalent would be like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Stephen Hawking, who's now dead, but those kinds of folks lending credence or believing in ghosts. Would it be that sort of equivalent?
Yeah, absolutely. He was a huge name. And for him to say, oh, Katie King, she's definitely real, definitely a real ghost. It just really almost tanked his career and tarnished his really good research in chemistry.
Is it common for scientists and people who are otherwise rational to believe in the supernatural like this?
Yeah, you see it kind of again and again. So there was another very famous scientist, Sir Oliver Lodge, who was a big name in radio technology. He really helped to develop the radio. And he, again, was investigating ghosts and mediums from a fairly skeptical perspective. But then his son, Raymond, was killed in the First World War. And the grief just tore him apart. And a medium reached out to him and said, Raymond is in touch with me. Come and do these seances, see what Raymond has to say. And Sir Oliver Lodge just gets sucked into it. And he writes this book called Raymond, which is all about these seances. So I think sometimes it is about the circumstance around the scientist that draws them in. So for Sir William Crookes, it was because he had the hots for the ghost Katie King. But for Sir Oliver Lodge, it was grief that really shook his skepticism and made him more of a spiritualist, really.
Being sweet on someone, having grief, like these are all deeply human reasons to get sucked into something that's not rational. Let's fast forward to now, like YouTube channels, television shows with ghost hunters. People are obsessed with this. And you write that our obsession or that ghost hunting says more about us, the living, than it does the dead we seek. Say more about that.
Yeah, so the book that I wrote to do with all this research, Ghosted, it has ghosts in it and it has spooky stuff in it, but it's more about the living and our obsession and our need to, I suppose, help with our existential crises sometimes and grief. But also, it's just, if you've ever been ghost hunting, it's actually really fun. I did go on a ghost hunt and I thought I had the time of my life. I thought it was great.
So it's one part fun activity, another dealing with the deep existential questions of what it means to be human?
Yeah, there's it's the full range of human emotions in this book. I feel, there's some chapters that are really, it's a lot of grief, and then there's another chapter where I buy a haunted doll from eBay just for the fun of it.
And has the haunted doll arisen and attacked you and your family, or no?
No, but I have her in my office at work, and it's really funny to gauge my colleagues' psyche by whether they will actually come into my office now or not. Some of them just linger at the doorway and they're kind of like, where is Bev? Is she in the office? Do I have to, hide from her? Some people think she's great and will shake her little plastic hand, but there are some colleagues that will not come into my office anymore, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but there we go.
Depends on the colleague, I suppose.
Yeah.
Are there other reasons why people keep searching for proof of ghosts, sightings of ghosts, videos of ghosts, even though, let's be honest, there's no real convincing evidence, at least not that's convinced the academic community that ghosts exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just about trying to find that bigger and better piece of evidence. So when I went ghost hunting, I didn't see a ghost, but something a little bit weird happened, and it kind of made me think like, oh, I want to do this again, and I want to try and get the same result. I want to try and get a better result. So I think that's why we want to ghost hunt, is because that evidence is kind of so just like almost there. Like you feel like you can almost get that evidence, and so it's quite enticing and addictive in some ways as well. But I think also it's quite a fun social activity. It's a really nice way to engage with history as well, if you do it responsibly, to engage with these historical buildings in a different way, in a less kind of stagnant way, especially in the UK where it's all very twee, National Trust, scones and jam and cream and stuff like that. It's a different way of experiencing history. But then again, yes, you get the YouTube and the TikTokers that are doing it for clout, I suppose, and the fame of it.
The fame of ghost hunting, my goodness, let's end it all now. I want to zoom into this word you use, responsibly, because the first story you gave me, it was a charlatan maybe trying to scam people for money. There can be a way to ghost hunt unethically, especially when you tell people, oh, your dead relative speaking to me, I just need $1,000 and I can communicate with them more. There is a way to do this non-ethically.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I spent £14 on a 50p charity shop haunted doll on eBay. Somebody made, it was for the book, so she's served her purpose in the end. But there is so much fraud and exploitation. There are ghost hunters that will break into abandoned buildings. Some of them aren't abandoned, that they realize as they get in there, and it can be done in very dubious ways, I think, very fraudulent ways and exploitative ways as well. So ghost hunting is really fun, but I think you just have to make sure that you're not getting swindled, but also that you're doing it in a kind of safe environment, and that there are rules and regulations in place as well.
Is there something to be said about confronting our own mortality when obsessed with ghost hunting?
Yeah, definitely. I have major existential crises every time I go to bed. And, I really fear the void and I really fear death as well. So I think that's something I noticed as well, that ghost hunting is about confronting mortality and not being able to realize or not being able to accept that death is the end.
Check out Alice's book, Ghosted, A History of Ghost Hunting and Why We Keep Looking. That is available wherever books are sold. Alice Vernon is a creative writing lecturer at Aberystwyth University in the UK. Alice, I appreciate you coming on the show, and happy Halloween, I guess.
Happy Halloween.
Up next, why do successful women still do most of the hard mental labor at home? The planning, the remembering, the worrying that keeps everything running? That's what we'll unpack in a moment.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The last show with David Cooper. Procrastinate your life away with us.
In households where women out-earn their partners, a new study finds that they're still doing most of the invisible thinking work that helps keeps family life running. Why does this mental load stick for women in households where they're the primary breadwinner? That is what we'll discuss here with senior lecturer at the University of Bath, Dr. Anna Catalano Weeks. Anna, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here.
Your study looks at mental load in the household. How is this different from the physical chores that we usually think of when we talk of housework?
Great. So one of the big distinctions that we are trying to make with this study and with our previous work where we're presenting a new measure of mental load is that it's really difficult to measure in units of time because it's the work that goes on in one's head, anticipating household needs, making decisions about those, planning, remembering, monitoring, going forward. So it's work that kind of goes on all the time that can be secondary. So you can be doing something else while in the back of your mind you're thinking of something related to the household or your family, or even tertiary work. So it's all this mental work that needs to be done related to from everything from finances to childcare, cleaning, food, and so on to kind of keep the household functioning.
I think of it like when chores are done evenly on paper, perhaps, like an equal amount of physical work. One partner is the one planning it all. They're the one who asks their spouse to do the work. They're the one who kind of is always worrying about it. But to the person who does the equal amount of physical work, they think that they're sort of contributing equally when they're not. Is that what we're sort of talking about here with mental load?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That in fact, one of the things about mental load is that it often goes unrecognized because if you're not doing it, and even when you are doing it, you may not recognize it as work because it's invisible, right? It is going on in our head, but it needs to happen. Someone needs to decide, right, what to make for dinner. And put some things on the list and figure out, do we have those things in the fridge, before maybe another partner makes the dinner. And what we found in our previous work is that, women, lots of studies show this, that women tend to do still today more household work, more caring work, but this gender gap is especially large for the mental load. And in this study, we looked at whether privileged women, like women who have successful careers, make a lot of money, so they have even less time available for household planning and organizing, whether these resources enable them to reduce their mental load.
Interesting.
Yeah, what we find there is actually that that women's time availability and their resources, they reduce the time they spend in physical household labor. So doing the chores around the house, taking care of kids, they have kids. And this is the same for men, right? So it makes sense that if you go out to work, you're going to have less time. You're probably going to have some childcare. We looked at parents. And the theories of household bargaining also suggest that when women are making more money in the household, then they can negotiate, and they should be doing less of the household labor for that reason as well. Because they're earning an income, that they have more economic power, and this should translate into power within the household. So in our study, we found that women's time availability and resources reduce the physical work, but make no difference at all to the mental load. So it's just super, super sticky for women.
It's interesting. It should translate to reduce mental load, but you found that it doesn't.
Yes. Well, we didn't actually think that it would, because these characteristics that we were just talking about related to mental load, that it's invisible, that it's kind of going on all the time, that it's in the back of one's mind, means that it doesn't have to take place in the home. So it kind of can come with us everywhere, which is very different. So compared to physical household work and caring work. So that means like time availability shouldn't really matter as much. And because it's often invisible, unrecognized, typically like highly gendered, assigned to women, kind of deeply socialized, that this is another aspect, which means that even if couples are super egalitarian, they think, and as in today, lots of couples, both partners work and they may be both, trying to raise a family, both ambitious, having great jobs. But even if they want to share this labor, because so much of it's invisible and the other partner may not know about it, it's really difficult to do so.
Do the partners who are not doing any of this mental load, do they think that they are? Like, the classic example is the man who says, oh, I'll do the chores, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, thinking that he does an equal amount of work when the planning is a huge part of it.
Right. And then that's actually more mental load to tell someone what to do, right?
Sure.
So we do find, so what we're measuring is people's perceptions, right, about who is responsible in the household for these daily mental life tasks, which can be anything from like, keeping track of household expenses to, remembering when it's time for your boiler to be serviced, or noticing when the towels and sheets need to be washed, these sort of daily life tasks. And we ask about 21 of these different types of tasks. And we find that both men and women probably are over-reporting a little bit primary responsibility, which is also common when you ask about time spent in physical household labor. But we find a much bigger difference for men than we do for women. So we ask a question after all these specific items about, now thinking about all of the mental work that needs to happen for your household to function, about how much of it would you say is your responsibility? And there we find that women say about 80%, which is pretty similar to the overall figure we have for about 71% of when we look at those specific items. So there's a gap, but it's not huge. For men, they tend to say 50%. But in reality, they're when you add up all the 21 items, they're doing less than that.
I got to get my boiler fixed. That's a conversation for somebody else. Are there physical consequences? Are there mental health consequences for people who are constantly carrying this mental to-do list?
Yeah, I think there's a number of consequences. In terms of research, we've worked on a few of these already. I have a couple of research projects which look at the implications of very high mental load for political engagement. So we think about like interest in politics as another form of leisure activity. When you're very overloaded with tasks to do with your household, you're just less likely to want to pay attention to politics. And so in one paper, I argue this is one reason why, especially for issues like national political issues, that women tend to say they're less interested in politics because they tend to have less bandwidth and energy, particularly when they have young children. We're also currently looking at the mental load and well-being, satisfaction with one's life. And there, I think we're finding some really interesting things that, as you expect, for mothers, when their mental load goes up, their feelings of happiness with their life go down. But for fathers, it's actually the opposite, which I think is really positive, which suggests that, okay, we know that if anyone's doing like 90% of this work, it's going to feel like overload, right? But fathers have room to move up, and that actually is improving well-being for everyone.
Wow. So for couples listening, for fathers, men listening who may have this shocking realization that they're not contributing to the mental load of the work in the household, what piece of advice would you have for them?
I think awareness is actually a big part of it. So having conversations, and particularly, like not every couple is the same, and people may be happy with different divisions. It doesn't have to be 50-50, but it's just what people, feel is equitable and fair, right? But having open conversations about it, I think is a really good first step. And yeah, I mean, I study politics, so I also want to encourage governments to think about policies that enable fathers to do more of this caring work, right? Because in places like the UK where I am, there's really a lot of the policies are set up so that mothers are from birth really assigned the ones responsible rather than, equal leave and enabling fathers to do more of that caring work.
All right. And if it comes to household chores, if you're the person saying, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, maybe think twice about that view. I appreciate you coming on the show, Anna. I appreciate you sharing your study with me.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Dr. Anna Catalano Weeks is a senior lecturer at the University of Bath. Here's what we'll cover in a few moments. Our school isolation rooms. When you punish a kid by removing them from the classroom, hurting them. Well, new research says they're doing damage and aren't such a good idea. That in a moment.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The show that makes you laugh, think, and occasionally uncomfortable. The Last Show with David Cooper.
There is new research that reveals that school isolation rooms, which are meant to manage bad behavior of students, may be harming children's well-being, cutting them off from learning, friends, and support. There is a cost to isolating kids as a form of punishment. And we are going to discuss this here with Neil Humphrey, a psychology of education professor at the University of Manchester in UK. Neil, welcome to the program.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
So isolation rooms or internal exclusions, there's a different name for that here in North America, but what are they and how are they used in schools?
So these are, the name that's generally given for them in North America is in-school suspension, but this is a space within school where young people who, for serious disciplinary reasons, are required to spend time out of the classroom at the instruction of a member of staff before being reintegrated back into the classroom. And they could spend anything from, an hour or two to half a day to a full day and sometimes even more. And they've been in England, where we did our research, they've been around for about probably between 15 and 20 years, and they've grown quite significantly over that time.
And the thinking is this will help the student, this will get them to reflect on their behavior, this will be some sort of corrective thing where they'll learn their lesson and not act out again. They're supposed to help students, at least in earnest.
Indeed, I think it's all of the above is the intention. It's supposed to be a deterrent, and it's also supposed to be an alternative to what we would call a fixed term exclusion or a suspension. So when the young person's not actually allowed in the school for a period of time, and one of the reasons that this developed as a behavior management practice is because there was a view that actually if you suspend kids from school, actually that might be perceived as a reward. It's like time off school. So the idea is you keep kids in school but isolated from their peers, and in theory at least that acts as a deterrent, and it might make the young person think twice about acting out again.
Well, let's get to your study, because your study shows that this form of isolation can actually harm pupils' well-being. What effects did you observe when you actually looked at this punishment practice?
So we have a project called Be Well, which is about young people's mental health and well-being. And as part of that, we do a really big survey once a year with kids all across Greater Manchester, which is where I'm from in the north of England. And we surveyed about 34,000 young people last year. And one of the questions that we asked them was about their experience. So we kind of gave them a description of this practice and we said, does this ever happen to you? And then we compared those kids who said yes, who had been internally excluded, with a very, very similar group of kids. We did this kind of thing where it's matching the kids, if you like. So we're looking at kids with similar behavior, kids with similar characteristics. The difference being one group have been internally excluded, the other haven't. It's the kind of thing you do when you can't really do a natural, like an experiment. I can't flip a coin and say, right, you kids get isolated, you kids don't. So in the absence of that, we use this technique called propensity score weighting. And we compare the outcomes. And what we found was the kids who were internally excluded, or the kids who were subject to removal from their classroom, they had significantly worse relationships with staff as a result of their internal exclusion. So it's actually damaging that relationship that you really want to build between staff and students. The young people who are internally excluded, we ask kids about the extent to which they feel they belong in school. And what we found is, if you're internally excluded, it's eroding that sense of connection to the school that you attend. And then for girls specifically, we found worse rates of mental well-being. So girls who are internally excluded, it looks like it's damaging their mental health as well as their kind of relationships with staff and their sense of connection. For girls specifically, we find it's harming their mental well-being.
You mentioned girls, which is a specific group of students. Are there other groups of students who might be affected more adversely by these isolation punishment techniques?
Well, no, interestingly, we found we found in terms of who's more likely to be internally excluded, we found some really interesting things there around kids with disabilities, kids from poorer backgrounds, kids from minoritized ethnic groups. They're all more likely to be internally excluded. But in terms of the outcomes, actually, that finding with the girls is the only kind of specific subgroup finding that we had. What that's saying, though, in our analysis is actually it's uniformly harmful. So we found, regardless of disability, regardless of socioeconomic background, regardless of which ethnic group young people belong to, we find similar effects basically to the overall effect that we're finding in terms of those three outcomes, other than specifically girls for mental well-being.
Now, there's got to be teachers who, perhaps without looking at your research or really deeply thinking about this, but there's got to be teachers who think this is a real good tool for maintaining classroom order. I don't know if I agree with that, but what would you say to a teacher like that?
Well, the first thing I'd say, which I always say to any teachers, is, I fully understand managing a classroom of unruly teenagers is incredibly stressful. In England, particularly at the moment, there's a whole conversation going on around the behaviour of young people, of teenagers, and whether things have got worse over time. So, I get it, and if you're a teacher in a classroom, I can understand how the idea of actually having the option to remove somebody that's being disruptive, it will feel like it's working because it's kind of moving the problem, and I can get on teaching with the rest of my class who are behaving. But what our research and what other research from the States shows is two things. One is, as I've said, our research shows that it's actually harming young people's well-being and their relationships. There's research from the States that shows it impacts negatively on young people's attainment, so how well they do academically. And the other thing is actually, in terms of that initial rationale, that initial reason for doing it, you want to improve behavior. There's research from North America that shows actually it makes behavior worse in the long run rather than better. So it's, rather than acting as a deterrent, what it's doing is it's labeling young people. They're kind of building the impression of themselves, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, if you're going to exclude me and if you're going to put me somewhere else, maybe I'm going to act up more. So it's actually, the research from the state shows it makes things worse rather than better. And the thing about, kind of preserving the learning of the other kids who are not being disruptive, again, there's some really interesting research from the States that shows, so they look at this thing called spillover effect, so how does this practice affect the kids who aren't being removed? And there's a study from the States that shows that actually it makes no difference to the other kids' attainment. So the idea that it might benefit the kids who aren't removed because they're better able to get on and learn isn't supported by any of the evidence.
Interesting. A crude analogy, and you might not like it, you might disagree with me, is that people learn how to be criminals in prison. If you send someone to a punishment specific area, they're going to get worse. They're going to internalize that label, and they're,
Well, exactly. It's telling the young people that are being removed, that there is something different about you, that you don't deserve to be in this classroom with the other kids. It's kind of sending they might not be explicitly saying those kinds of things, and it might be done with the best intentions of kind of trying to control a very difficult situation, but that's what the young people are internalizing. There's lots of research where they've interviewed young people who've been subject to this kind of behavior management practice that shows that that's the kind of message that they're receiving. And there's examples of, in England again as well, of it not being used just to manage poor behavior. So you can kind of picture in your head, this might be a child that's throwing chairs at a teacher or swearing at a teacher. Actually, in some circumstances, there's evidence that it's being used for uniform infractions. So there was a case in the news recently in England of a child that was placed in isolation because they were wearing the wrong shoes. So it's evolved into something that's not just being used to manage bad behavior.
Neil, we don't have a ton of time, but recommendations to teachers on alternative forms of discipline when a student is disruptive?
Well, the key thing that I always come back to is, in England, this is part of the kind of landscape of behaviour management. What we need to do is take a step back and look at prevention. So the idea is, the more that we can do in terms of supporting social and emotional learning of students so that they can better manage their own behaviour, really good reward systems so that kids can get the kind of reinforcement for being good. Those are the kind of foundations we need so that we don't have to internally exclude young people.
Neil Humphrey is a psychology of education professor at the University of Manchester in the UK. Neil, thank you for having this discussion with me.
Thank you so much, David.
It's coming. Twice a year we shift our clocks, and it's more than just annoying. It's harming your health. Up next, we'll see how permanent standard time could save millions, preventing strokes, obesity, and more.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. For those who know that questioning everything includes questioning this show's existence. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Every spring and every fall, like clockwork, we change our clocks. But what if that simple act is quietly harming our health? A new Stanford study says permanent standard time, I like the sound of that, could save millions from serious illness. I'm here with someone who worked on that. She's a bioengineering PhD candidate. Her name is Lara Weed. Lara, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Is what inspired this study the fact that you, like me, are profoundly annoyed by the time change, especially when we go to standard time in the fall?
So this study was actually inspired by a lot of the discussions that were going on last year around this time and some of the discourse on Twitter and other social media platforms around daylight savings time. And me being in a circadian rhythms lab, I had a bunch of models already available from some of my wearable sensors work. And I kept thinking to myself, why doesn't somebody test this? Why don't we already know the answer to this question from a circadian perspective? And it turns out we didn't know the answer to this question. So I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to apply some of these models that we already had ready to go to try to just answer which is better, standard time, daylight savings time, or what we're currently doing, switching back and forth between the two.
Okay, well, let's give a brief definition of what a circadian rhythm is and why it's so important to our overall health.
So the circadian rhythm, you can think of it kind of like your body's clock. And your body has many different clocks, but the circadian rhythm has a central clock located deep inside of the brain that's regulated by your light exposure pattern. And this central clock sends signals to all of the other clocks located down even to the cell level in every single one of the cells in your body and all of the different organ systems in your body to coordinate their activities. So you don't have conflicting processes going on at the same time. You're not, going to sleep at the wrong period. And it really allows you to tap into something called predictive physiology. And the most basic example of this is getting hungry right before lunch. I think everybody has kind of experienced that. But when you start to mess with your light exposure and time policy, which can then have downstream impacts on your light exposure, you can start to apply little disruptions to this clock that can add up and can influence health on many different levels. And researchers know that from some of our work in shift workers or these extreme cases of disruptions to the clock, that these disruptions have been linked to both cardiovascular and cardiometabolic disorders and even cancer previously. So we know the coordination of these clocks is very important, but we didn't know whether just that 1 hour time change twice a year would have an impact. And it turns out at the population, there's quite a it's a small impact, but when you have a large population, it affects or can affect many people.
So it would reduce cardiovascular risks. I'm reading obesity, stroke rates. Could permanent standard time really improve our overall health?
Our models suggest that it could improve it at a population level. So probably for the average person having like the time change back and forth, you may not notice that it may not affect you that much. But when you look at an entire population, there's some proportion of people that kind of pushes them over the edge. And that's where we see increases in obesity predicted by our models and the prevalence of stroke predicted by our models. So it's not like the time change is like huge impact on every single person. It's going to, spiral everybody's health out of control hugely. The effect is relatively small, but that can make a big difference for some portion of the population.
What is better from your vantage point? Daylight at dusk, like in the evening, or daylight in the morning? Should we always be on standard time? Should we always be on daylight time? Should we split the difference and annoy the rest of the world and go to a half an hour time zone? What should be the thing we're doing?
Yeah, so the way that circadian biologists think about it is, so your circadian rhythm has a period. Every day it repeats, and that period is a little bit longer than 24 hours. So you kind of have to put in a little bit of work to keep the circadian rhythm in sync with the outer world. And the way that you can do that, if you're generally on a regular schedule, is by getting more morning light exposure. That essentially shortens your period. So you go from a little over 24 hours down to 24 hours, and you can maintain synchrony over long periods of time. Our models suggest, and behaviorally it's suggested, that standard time favors this morning light exposure, and people are getting that signal that they need to shorten their period to 24 hours and stay in sync over longer periods of time. And that's even accounting for some of the seasonal variations that you might see. So sunrise and sunset times vary across like whether you're more east or more west in a time zone, or if you go to a more northern latitude, it's like both sunrise and sunset kind of shorten together. So you're getting later sunrises, earlier sunsets, and we took all of this into account in our models. So yeah, we think that definitely there's a strong enough evidence for stopping our shifting back and forth. And our models suggest that standard time is preferable, but both standard time and daylight savings time do reduce the incidence of both stroke and obesity.
Okay, well, I mean, I think a lot of people would naively prefer the daylight because they would enjoy the light in the evening just for their social lives and stuff. But I guess standard confers a slightly more of a benefit. I feel like we're burying the lead here, though. We got to convince like politicians. We got to convince everyone in society. Like, do you think this will ever happen? I hear like it's been spoken about for years now with no actual change.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting area, I think, when you start getting into the policy aspects of it, because we're really only qualified to talk about the circadian health impacts, but there's also other like economic considerations, like if you're getting more light in the afternoon or evening, maybe you can get in another round of golf, or maybe there's more like outdoor retail places that people have time to go to. There's safety considerations, like if we're on daylight savings time in the winter, it's very dark in the morning and there's kids going to schools. And so there's many different like pieces of the puzzle here. And I think when people are making policy considerations, they really need to take a look at like all of the research that is going on in the space, not just in the circadian health space, but in these other like economic and safety areas as well.
In terms of our health, though, are there things we could be doing like on a personal level to make sure our circadian rhythms are doing a little better, like using sleep masks, or in the dead of winter, using those sad lights, which I love, like on your desk that just pretend to be sunlight? Are there things we can be doing short of actually getting this permanent standard time?
Yeah, I mean, there's things that you can do to kind of regulate your circadian rhythm and your own personal behaviors. Definitely getting morning light exposure can help to shorten your period and kind of regulate that time frame. Um, the sad lamps, that's actually, those are very bright. Those can have a circadian effect if they're delivered at the right times, but those are typically used to treat more of like seasonal depression. So there can be like off target, I guess, effects of some of these therapies. things that you can do to kind of maintain your light diet, definitely keeping a very dark environment at night, like sleep masks, minimizing any sort of sound or other disturbances in sleep. Other things that you can do, you can live a more active lifestyle that can help you like fall asleep more quickly in some cases. So many different things kind of come together to contribute to your overall circadian health.
Well, Lara Weed is a bioengineering PhD candidate at Stanford. Lara, thank you for talking to me about this stuff. I appreciate you being on the show, and I guess we'll be setting our clocks forward in just a few days. Or back, is it? I forget. No, in November. I don't know what's going on, but thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, David.
Up next, what really separates romance from friendship? Not much at all. When you remove sex from the equation, the line between platonic relationships and romantic ones practically vanishes.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Broadcasting intimate details and useless information from an undisclosed location in New York City. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Friendships and romantic relationships. If you remove sex from the mix, the line between platonic relationships and romantic ones can get surprisingly blurry, sometimes nearly disappearing altogether. At least that is according to new research. I'm here with some folks who worked on that. They are psychology and sexuality researchers at Queen's University in Canada. I'm here with Dr. Sari Van Anders. Sari, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And Carolina de Barros. Carolina, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right, this is such a fun one, that line between romantic and platonic relationships being blurrier than we think. How do we set out to research something like this?
Yeah, I think for us, the first step was kind of taking sex out of the equation because sex is the thing that people bring up first. And that's both like in our day-to-day conversations with people we know and also in research itself. A lot of the work that we have about what is romantic is kind of assuming that sex is going to be a part of it. So for us, the first step of the research was actually just to say, what if we don't have sex at all? Because we know that these relationships exist. We know that people have really, really close platonic relationships that aren't sexual. But we also know that there are people out there who have romantic relationships that aren't sexual for a wide variety of reasons. So the one that came up a lot for us was people who were asexual or people who had partners who were asexual, but we also had people who didn't want to have sex before marriage, people who had been together for years and years and just didn't want to have sex with each other anymore, and who were still in romantic relationships. So we wanted to interview those people to see what they felt was making their relationship romantic, given that sex could not be that reason.
And what was making those relationships romantic? What was the line between that and just a very close friendship?
Yeah, so we divided our interviews into two different sections. So we asked them for just general descriptions of what their relationships were like, but we also asked them for definitions closer to the end. So what we found was when people were describing their experiences, there was a lot of overlap. So all these things that we talk about, again, both in our day-to-day and in research, things like nurturance and intimacy, things like commitment, things like whether we put the other person in front of us or before us when we're making decisions. Those things seem to come up a lot, both for the romantic and the platonic relationships, in ways that really weren't that easily distinguishable. There were very few things that we were like, oh, this is only coming up with romantic or only coming up with non-romantic. But when we asked for definitions, people seem to have a bit more of a clear distinction of this is romantic and this is not. And those distinctions were normative. So they fit kind of what we would expect from social norms and what those tell us about relationships.
Interesting. So I'm trying to break this down. Like, people categorize, when you ask them to categorize them, they had this distinction, but in reality, that distinction didn't exist too much at all.
Yeah. And we asked about the experiences first, which I think was really important because that meant that they weren't thinking like, oh, well, I said this is what relationships are like, and so now I'm going to think about my story in that light. We asked them, tell me your story first, and then afterwards, tell us, what do you think the difference is?
So in reality, this distinction's not there, but when we start thinking of societal labels and societal distinctions, we have these clear two types of relationships in our mind. Did that surprise you?
It did. I think I expected that people who had experiences that weren't normative, so people who were in these relationships that were either like really, really close platonic ones that are closer than what people would say a platonic relationship should be, or people who were in romantic relationships that weren't sexual, I expected that those people would say, yeah, my definitions don't match what society says they should be, because I have these experiences that clearly contradict them. So we were really surprised to find that even the people who had these experiences, their actual definitions still seem to kind of match what broader social norms would tell us they are.
Sounds like a bit of a labeling problem to me, and maybe our obsession with labeling relationships. I don't know, like romantic or platonic or sexual or asexual. Does it kind of limit the ways in which people actually connect with their friends and close partners?
I think it certainly impacts the way people connect with their friends and close partners. I think one of the things that did come up when we looked at labels was most of the labels, like people in both romantic and platonic relationships use them. So even, I mean, what we would expect. So things like friends came up as a descriptor for both the platonic relationships and romantic relationships. Words like husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend, even the platonic relationships use them, like often in this very joking manner, but they still did. The only one that didn't was the word queer platonic, and that only came up in these platonic relationships. And what that indicated to us was that even though for a lot of people, their definitions seem to still be based off of those social norms, there was a group of people who was saying, these don't seem to work for us, so let's make up some new words. Let's look at some new terms that we can use instead that fit our relationships better. And this is something that's come up in previous work of Dr. Van Anders as well, of people making up new words that are better able to describe their experiences because society doesn't give them those words.
Well, Sari, any do you want to say a little bit about that research or what Carolina's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things, and Carolina, you jump in to add more or correct me, but is we were surprised at how much these labels seem to matter to people in making sense of their non-sexual, platonic, and or romantic relationships. I think we thought these are relationships that challenge norms. These are relationships that are queer. People have done a lot of work to think through them, and they clearly had. I mean, people were so thoughtful about what they said. But we were surprised at how much those normative ideas about what relationships should be, those labels, as you talked about, David, how much those really popped up in people's discussions about these different kinds of relationships.
Well, let's talk about some of these different kinds of relationships. Some in your study were quote unquote romantic, but there was no sex at all. There were friendships that involved behaviors that we might consider romantic. Things like touch, affection, maybe even physical intimacy. Tell me more about these blurred lines that people have in their lives when they don't think about labels.
A lot of our participants in romantic relationships, these were relationships that were either previously defined as romantic and sexual and then became non-sexual or had been non-sexual the whole time. And these relationships that they were creating, one of the things that I thought was really cool was even though sex wasn't a part of it, they were navigating expectations about sex. So they didn't necessarily engage in sexual behavior. They weren't necessarily sexually attracted to each other, but they had to work around the societal definition of romantic as also sexual. And so the way they described their relationships was often with stories of, and then we had a discussion about how I didn't want to have sex anymore. Or I remember one participant who was asexual who, when they started their relationship, had that discussion of, I don't experience this attraction. I don't want this as part of my relationship. And I want my partner to know that so that we can work through what that's going to mean for us. So in the romantic relationships, there was a lot of that navigation. And then in the non-romantic relationships, a lot of them were talking about having these really, really close relationships that were like quote unquote closer than what people might expect from a non-romantic relationship. And often that was hard for them to navigate, knowing that we live in a society where those relationships aren't as valued as romantic ones. So they would talk about how hard it was to feel like people weren't taking their relationships as seriously because they weren't romantic.
What do you hope your study changes? Like, what do you hope it changes about the way society views platonic or romantic relationships?
Yeah, I hope it gives us all some insight into how we all think about these relationships, because I think a lot of us tend to fall back on those social normative ideas of what is romantic and what isn't. But I think a lot of us also have experiences that don't fall neatly into those boxes. So thinking about our own experiences and how those challenge these norms.
Everyone could benefit from talking about their expectations. So people in these non-normative relationships discuss what will they do if they're not being sexual? What does that mean? What does that involve? But people in sexual relationships could also benefit from that. Sex therapy is really clear on that's useful, but also it's like, just because you're sexual, does that mean you're sexual every day with your partner, multiple times a day? So talking about it, I think, can be really useful for everyone. So in that sense, I think this work, Carolina has done this really nice job explaining how what we learn from these non-normative relationships actually can help us think about even normative relationships.
Well, Catalano Barros and Dr. Sari Van Anders are psychology and sexuality researchers at Queen's University. Carolina, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Sari, thank you as well.
Thank you.
In a few moments' time, a lot of new teachers burn out and quit after just a few years. But why might some thrive and stick with it? The answer might be hidden in their personalities. Details soon.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Exploring both interstellar and interpersonal space-time continuums. The Last Show with David Cooper.
For teachers, the job can be rough. And for many new teachers, it can be a little too rough. A third leave within 5 years. So why do some teachers crumble under the pressure of their job while others thrive and stick with it? That's what we'll explore with Joanne Taberner, who is a senior lecturer in education at the University of Manchester. Joanne, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here, David. It's great to be here.
So you must have noticed that certain new teachers quit before you decided to actually study the why. How did you take notice of that?
Yeah, so having been a teacher myself and having worked closely with new teachers for many years, I know how demanding the profession is. And while many new teachers really flourish in their early years, others find the reality of the workload, pupil behavior, and accountability really overwhelming and sometimes leave the profession altogether. And that's a real challenge for schools.
You mentioned pupil behavior, and I'm thinking, man, I should have acted better when I was a kid. But this interview is not about me and how I was a bad student. What made certain teachers quit? What reasons did they give after those, 5 years on average? What were some of the things you saw?
Yeah, so typically it's to do with workload, accountability, pressures, a lack of alignment with the school ethos, pupil behavior, as you just mentioned. But that's more a qualitative study that I'm just about embarking on now. So I'm going to be looking at a systematic review of the literature, specifically looking at qualitative studies and why beginning teachers leave within the first 5 years, but looking at that thematically.
Okay.
So this particular study was about personality and mental toughness, and we wanted to look at why some new teachers really flourish, while others find it too stressful and leave the profession. So we talk a lot about training and support, which are of course vital, but we wanted to explore the personal side of what's happening within people that might make a difference to how they cope and stay motivated despite the pressures. So really, whether certain personality traits or levels of mental toughness, which is similar to resilience, might play a part.
Well, I think mental toughness would serve anybody in any profession, but it's doubly so in teaching. When a layperson hears mental toughness, I think we just think of resilience or grit. How would you actually define mental toughness as it comes to doing a job like teaching?
That's a great question. Thank you very much. So that mental toughness would be the ability to cope with the demands of the teaching profession, adaptability, flexibility. Specifically, if we look at the construct of mental toughness, it's to do with having control of one's life, commitment to what one is doing and the profession, confidence, a high level of confidence in what you're doing and self-efficacy, and looking at challenges as an opportunity for development instead of looking at them as a threat.
So people with that trait ended up staying in teaching longer on average than those who don't?
Yes, exactly. But we particularly found that teachers who scored higher on extroversion and conscientiousness from personality showed higher mental toughness. So that meant that those who scored higher on extroversion and conscientiousness would be better able to handle stress, keep perspective, and bounce back after a stressful day.
Is the takeaway that if you're introverted and are not conscientious, you shouldn't go to teaching, or you should just know that it's going to be tougher for you to stick with it?
No, exactly not. I mean, it could be, but what we found in particular there was a small part of extroversion that really stood out, called social self-esteem, and that's to do with how comfortable and confident you feel around other people. And so it's actually believing that you're capable, that others like you, and that you can be confident in social or professional situations. So we found that teachers with higher social self-esteem were much more mentally tough, and they seemed better able to stay positive, calm, and motivated even when things were stressful. So you asked me as to whether that should put people off if they're more introverted. To be honest, I'm very much an introvert. But the good news is that we can develop mental toughness. So there's a real opportunity for teacher training and early career programs to do a few simple things to help new teachers.
Well, that's really interesting, and I got to know what these few simple things are, because imagine someone's listening right now, they're just thinking of getting into teaching, or they're just training to be a teacher, and they're hearing some of these traits from you that don't necessarily do well, that would cause them to quit. What can they do at training time to build that mental toughness?
Absolutely. So we found that encouraging new teachers to engage in structured self-reflection, think about what's gone well, and really focus on that and what they've learned, can increase self-awareness and confidence or self-efficacy. Um, Setting achievable targets can help to build a sense of progress, which has been found to relate to good mental and physical health and well-being, good sleep, lower rates of burnout. And then also having a mentor who offers constructive feedback that builds confidence and helps beginning teachers to recognize their strengths is really powerful. And then overall, when new teachers understand their strengths and motivations and feel supported, believe in their own ability to improve, they're far more likely to cope with the demands of the classroom.
If I'd have guessed before this interview and before reading about your research that the reason people quit teaching, I would have thought it was maybe like workload or bureaucracy or lack of funding or not being treated well. Do those kinds of factors also contribute, or does your study shows those aren't the main ones?
Of course, they also contribute, and unfortunately, there isn't much that we can do to fix education policy and workload. But what we can do is give beginning teachers a set of skills that mean they're able to bounce back, they're able to look at challenges as an opportunity, they're able to learn from their experiences without becoming as stressed as you might think, and knowing that they're capable of doing great things and making a real difference to people's lives.
Did you notice any patterns between people who teach young kids, like, I don't know, primary school, first grade, that kind of thing, and then high school, their final years? Because I feel like the older the kids, the tougher the environment. But is that what you saw?
So in context dependent, yes, it is context dependent. And that's again something that we're going to be exploring in our next study. The data that came in were mixed together, really primary and secondary, and we didn't undertake any analysis specifically looking at age range. This time we were more focused on specifically the personality traits and mental toughness, and we also looked at narcissism because some previous research had suggested narcissism, the self-assured and confident side, might actually be useful in teaching. But actually, it turned out that it wasn't narcissism itself that helped teachers. It was really the social confidence that sometimes comes with it. So the real benefit wasn't arrogance or self-focus. It was a genuine self-belief and self-esteem that mattered most.
Interesting. And those might be associated with narcissism, but it isn't narcissism at its core that makes a great teacher or someone
Yeah.
unwilling to quit.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you give any early insight into whether it's more difficult for teachers who teach certain age groups, or it's too soon to say?
It's too soon to say, but really from the national data that we look at, it does look to be that there are particular difficulties in secondary education, particularly in the northwest of England, where school exclusion statistics are highest in England. And so, yeah, the data suggests that it's tougher in secondary education, 11 to 16.
Got it. Well, Joanne Taberner is a senior lecturer in education at the University of Manchester. Joanne, I appreciate you sharing your research with me.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for having me.
And here's what we'll cover after the break. Your morning scroll is secretly changing how you treat your coworkers. That's right, social media shapes your mood and motivation at work. So think twice before using TikTok at your desk. Details in a minute.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. When the day is done, we're just getting started. The last show with David Cooper.
Scrolling through your social media feed at work might seem innocent enough, maybe just a little waste of time, but it could warp how you feel about your coworkers, your job, even yourself. There's a new study that explains how, and I'm here with one of its authors, Dr. Rebecca Greenbaum, who's a professor of human resource management at Rutgers University. Rebecca, first off, welcome to the program.
Thank you, David.
So looking at how folks use social media as not just a distraction at work, what made you choose to investigate this? Is it because people are sitting at their desks secretly on TikTok too much?
Okay, so if I'm honest about the why behind the study, it was because a long time ago, I was at work and I was scrolling my feed and I saw what some of my coworkers were doing, and it did not seem like work. And that drove my reactions towards them specifically. Like it affected the extent to which I wanted to help them out the next time they're in the office because they seemed like they just weren't really working hard when I was. So that actually was what this study started off as. But what we ended up eventually studying over time was a little bit different. It basically gets into the idea that when we go onto social media, we're confronted with a range of social information. And that information that we consume very much can affect our emotional states that then drive our motivation. And so this is what we looked at. When you go onto social media day to day, depending on what you see, not just what you see, but what you focus on when you're on social media, can affect, again, your emotional state. And then if it's within the context of work, that emotional state can turn into an energetic state that affects whether or not you withdraw from coworkers or whether you end up hitting your work goals that day. Now, to be clear, it may not be an overwhelming effect, but sometimes it can be. So if you think about an instance where maybe something contentious is going on in the news, maybe something political, that I would call contentious content, especially if it's something that you don't agree with. And the interesting thing about the way we study social media is that it is very much in the eye of the beholder. So if I go on to David Cooper's Facebook page, I'm still a little bit more of a dinosaur. I use Facebook as opposed to more of the more modern forms of social media. But if I go to your page and we're friends, but you post something that I see as being more controversial or contentious, and perhaps we're coworkers, that can make me feel anxious and then lead me to pulling away from our social interactions, or maybe even the social interactions with other coworkers throughout the day, just because I'm feeling uneasy in terms of my social relationships. So that's just one example of some of what we studied.
So that sounds like a particularly bad kind, observing contentious content of our coworkers affecting the relationship. Are there other kinds? Are there kinds of social media use at work that don't really matter that much? Are all types of content that we might scroll while distracted at our desk created equal?
It's not all created equal. And I would say that one of the more interesting things about the way we studied this is we asked participants who were partaking in our surveys multiple days. So they filled out multiple surveys across 2 work weeks. We asked them midday to describe a post that they actually really focused on. So one that was particularly salient to them. So I think that this is important because it illustrates the fact that you're bombarded really with a variety of content, a whole bunch of different information, and some of it may not stand out to you, but the information that does stand out to you, again, can drive your emotional states and motivation. And some of those more positive forms could be things like, and this is what our study found, family-oriented posts where you see pictures of maybe your niece or nephew or other people's nieces and nephews, but it makes you feel more communal and like you have a social network. And that can then lead to a state of self-assurance, which is sort of like a state of confidence that helps us to lean into our work because we're basically playing off of those positive dividends that we experience through a more positive social media experience. Other examples would be attractiveness posts, where you see something that really catches your eye and you find it to be attractive. It could be sexy, for example. And perhaps that puts you in a state of self-assurance and feelings like, okay, I can take on the world. I'm feeling really good right now. And that has some carryover effect to how you're working towards your goals throughout the day. I say some because a whole bunch of different things affect our motivation, but our study does show statistical significance, suggesting there's at least some effect on how we may then carry out the rest of our work days. One thing that I want to note, just to make sure that the listeners are clear, is that when we conduct some of these large studies, we have to start small, just because if we tried to study everything at once, we would not have enough power with our data to detect effects. And so the reason why I note that is some of you who are listening might think, yeah, but when I see attractive posts, they make me feel depressed. And that couldn't be true. And that's where for some of the content that we looked at via social media, specifically accomplished posts, we did look at what we call as moderators or factors within you that can affect whether you respond positively or negatively. But future studies are going to have to tackle that in more depth.
One thing we hear about often with social media is that comparing ourselves with it can foster sort of like a competitiveness when we look at other people's posts, maybe in the work context, like someone bragging about a promotion or some success they had. Can that have a positive effect if I'm sort of comparing myself directly to my coworkers, or is that negative, or is it a little bit of both?
Our specific study, even though social media is vast in terms of what you can observe, we landed on 4 main types of social media content. That's the information, the types of posts that people are consuming. We landed on 4, and just as an initial way to research this. So attractiveness, as I already mentioned, family, contentious, and the last is accomplished. Now, that is a particular one where we did look at a moderator, which is just a way of saying that we had individual differences with respect to our competitiveness. And we actually did look at competitiveness, David, that can affect the extent to which we observe accomplished posts and whether that actually makes it so we feel more self-assured and confident versus whether we feel more anxious as a result of what we're observing. So what I thought was interesting is that even without considering trait competitiveness, so if we put that off to the side for just a moment, we did find that people just generally day after day, because we looked at this across days, on the days that they observed accomplished posts, so someone else is in your social network on social media, they do something that's accomplished, they get a promotion, or I don't know, maybe even they won a race, something like that. It can lead to both a sense of self-assurance and confidence that drives your own work goals, or it has an alternative effect of making you feel more anxious, presumably because you're not living up to the socially prescribed standards of success in the world. And then that can lead to us withdrawing because, as you can imagine, if you're anxious, not feeling good about yourself because you saw all of these other people's posts, it can make us pull away from the world, at least temporarily. And so we found both of those effects. People who are competitive, they tend to lean into and really enjoy seeing those accomplished posts. It actually gets them going in terms of feeling even more self-assured and confident, which drives them to take on their work goals with more zest. They try to approach them with a little bit more vigor.
Is there a broader message here? How should we be looking at social media in the workplace? Is it a hazard? Should we avoid it? Can it be a motivational tool? Or does it just reflect how we already behave and maybe just amplify it in some ways?
I think the bottom line message is to be mindful, because it can be a source of positive motivation, but maybe also it can hijack your attention and take you away from your job. And so maybe really pay attention to when you choose to engage in that. Treat it more like a smoke break that just happens, a couple times a day, as opposed to scrolling all day long, because you never know what you're going to get.
Well, Dr. Rebecca Greenbaum is a professor of human resource management at Rutgers University. Rebecca, thanks for sharing this research and talking to me about social media in the workplace.
You're welcome, David.
Our Tuesday night show, that is a wrap on. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've got some news for you, though. The Last Show, it's available as a podcast. If you search David Cooper Last Show in your favorite podcast app, we will pop up. You can subscribe, and there you can catch any part of the show you missed. Or just head to www.lastshow.pizza. You can find out details of the podcast on our website and subscribe. Remember, that's .pizza, not .com. And as another incentive on that cast, some podcast-only content that you won't hear on the radio show. We got some great stuff for you this coming Saturday. I'm David Cooper. This was The Last Show, and we will be back tomorrow night.